In the Dune universe, power is a careful balancing act between the Emperor, the noble houses, and the Spacing Guild. Reverend Mother Mohaim described it as a three-pointed civilization, the Imperial household balanced against the federated great houses of the Landsraad, and between them, the Guild with its damnable monopoly on interstellar travel and transport. At the start of the Dune saga, Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV rules the known universe with his feared Sardaukar army, but his power is checked by the assembly of a noble house or houses called Landsraad. This council of great houses enforces the Great Convention's rules, like the ban of atomic weapons, and unites against any threat of one house being destroyed at a time. In many ways, the Landsraad is like a galactic parliament without the democracy, a congress of feudal lords whose collective might can't even challenge the Emperor. In this video, we'll explore the complete history of the Landsraad, from its ancient origins and evolution to the pivotal events that shaped its role in the imperial politics. We'll see how the Council of Nobles was born out of humanity's darkest hours, how it maintained a delicate balance of power for millennia, and what ultimately became of it in the age of Muad'Dib and the God Emperor. Get ready for a journey through thousands of years of intrigue, alliances, and betrayals as we uncover the story behind the Landsraad, the great council of houses that decide the fate of the Imperium. The story of the Landsraad begins over 10,000 years before the events of Dune, in an era when humanity was fighting for survival against the tyrannical thinking machines. During the catastrophic Balerian Jihad, the Great War against the thinking machines, the last free humans formed a coalition known as the League of Nobles. This league was a loose federation of planetary leaders and nobles united to resist machine domination. It was somewhat democratic by necessity, its member worlds even electing a viceroy to lead them, showing that early on humanity's nobles knew they had to band together or perish. As the Balerian Jihad came to an end around the year 108 before the Guild BG in the Imperium timeline, the humans were victorious over the machines, but a new political order was needed to prevent chaos. One of the League's own generals, Fakon Butler, stepped up to seize power. He took the name Fakon Carino and crowned himself the first Padishah Emperor of the new empire. However, the other great families remembered all too well the dangers of unchecked authority. After all, they had just overthrown machine tyrants. To ensure no single man could become a despot, the former League of Nobles transferred itself into the Landsraad, an assembly of the great houses designed to keep the Carino emperors in check. In short, the Landsraad was born as a safeguard against tyranny, balancing the newly established imperial throne. Under Emperor Carino's rule, the Landsraad formalized its purpose. The Great Convention was drafted, essentially a constitution for the Imperium, establishing a universal truce and rules of conduct among the houses. Every house, including the emperors, agreed to abide by these rules in exchange for collective security. As Duke Leto Atreides would later note, the forms must be obeyed, a phrase that began every article of this venerable convention. The most famous rule prohibited the use of atomics against human targets. After the apocalyptic wars of the past, this ensured that no feud would escalate into total genocide. Instead, noble conflicts had to follow strict forms, formal duels and feuds, rather than all-out slaughter. Through the Great Convention, the Landsraad established itself as the guardian of civilized warfare and stability in the Imperium. One of the main rules, which we already discussed, no atomic weapons against people. The great houses agreed never to use atomic weapons on human targets, preserving a deadly nuclear arsenal only as a last resort deterrent. Breaking this rule would bring the fury of the houses upon the offender. Next, regulated conflict, Canley and War of Assassins. Feuds between houses, called Canley or Vendetta, had to be formalized and limited. They could employ a clandestine war of assassins using sabotage, infiltration, and hired killers, but with rules to avoid mass civilian casualties. Assassination warfare was so very civilized, containing noble disputes to targeted strikes rather than open warfare. Next, the use of Judge of the Change. An official called the Judge of the Change would be appointed jointly by the Landsraad High Council and the Emperor to oversee important formalities, such as a transfer of a planetary fief or the terms of a vendetta. This ensured fairness when a house took over another's domain or when duels were arranged, and that all forms were properly obeyed. With these measures in place, the newly formed Landsraad rapidly grew in influence. According to historical records, this Council of Nobles already held sway over more than 13,000 worlds in the wake of the Jihad. In fact, the Landsraad, sometimes referred to in the old records as the Landsraad League, was meeting regularly even during the chaos of the Jihad and continued unbroken afterwards. Humanity had learned that only unity could guarantee survival, and for over 2,000 years after the Jihad, the Landsraad stood as a pillar of interstellar governance. Its earliest sessions set the stage for a galactic feudal system that would endure for millennia. As the centuries passed, the Landsraad became entrenched as one of the Imperium's three great powers. It represented the collective might of the mobile houses, a force theoretically equal to the Emperor himself. The Landsraad's very existence meant that no emperor could rule absolutely without the consent, or at least the complacency, of the other nobles. If united, all the great houses together could field armies and resources to rival the emperor's dreaded Sardaukar legions. In effect, the Landsraad was an insurance policy for the nobility. United we stand, divided we fall. As Paul Atreides explains in Dune, the great houses feared being picked off one by the emperor's forces. Quote, "Only in union do they match the imperial forces. That's why there is a Landsraad. This is the glue of the Great Convention." The threat of combined retaliation is what kept the emperor from simply destroying rival houses on a whim. The Landsraad itself was governed by its own inner council. A head council of influential members acted as a kind of steering committee or supreme tribunal. This body could adjudicate major disputes between houses and even pass judgment on the emperor if he overstepped certain bounds. Each great house had voting power in the Landsraad matters, proportional to its stature. Major houses, those ruling entire planets or star systems, wielded the lion's share of votes, while the imperial houses, House Carino, also had a significant single vote block within its own. Minor houses, or lesser-known nobility houses without significant planetary fiefs, were given a smaller vote, though they still had a vote in the assembly. In practice, this means the emperor could be outvoted if enough houses aligned against him on the issue. On some matters, even the emperor had no answer to the Landsraad High Council, illustrating the principle that no one was above the combined will of the great houses. Meetings of the Landsraad were not continuous. They were convened periodically or in times of crisis. The council will assemble on a neutral location, often on the imperial capital world, which in the Carino era was Seleucus Secundus, to debate and vote on pressing matters. Outside these formal sessions, however, the wheels of intrigue never stopped turning. The great houses plotted alliances, negotiated marriages, and brokered deals in back channels, all striving for advantage even when the Landsraad was not in session. The Bene Gesserit Sisterhood often acted as power brokers and advisors in the shadow of politics. Their agents whispered counsel in the ears of nobles, subtly steering events to fit the Sisterhood's grand plan. Chom, the vast trading company that controlled the Empire's wealth, was another critical arena of power for the Landsraad members. The Emperor and the most influential houses each held major shares in Chom, and positions on its directorate were highly coveted. A house with more Chom directorships enjoyed greater income and influence. Thus, behind every Landsraad vote were also economic interests. Control of the spice melange trade through the Chom and Spacing Guild and other commerce could make or break a great house. Within the system, countless minor conflicts and power plays occurred over the millennia. Some feuds remained relatively contained thanks to the Great Convention's rules. For example, the Moritani-Ganaz feud, a legendary vendetta between House Moritani and House Ganaz, was fought as a war of assassins and settled without engulfing other worlds. The duelists of Ganaz became renowned as master swordsmen across the Imperium after surviving such struggles. Meanwhile, Canley, the formal declaration of vendetta, became an accepted part of noble life. The bitter rivalry between House Atreides and House Harkonnen is one of the most famous Canley feuds. Generation after generation, Atreides and Harkonnen plots and reprisals went on, always stopping short of open warfare thanks to the strictures of the Landsraad. These examples show how the Landsraad's conventions allowed controlled conflict. Noble houses could scheme, compete, even assassinate, but only under certain rules and within moderation. This maintained a tenuous peace in the Imperium for thousands of years. The Landsraad thus presided over the so-called Age of the Imperium, balancing ambition with order, and keeping the Imperium throne honest, at least most of the time. By the time of the original Dune novel, year 10,191 AG after the Guild, the Landsraad had waxed and waned in influence but remained a major force. The reigning Emperor Shaddam IV of House Carino was wary of the Landsraad's power even as he exploited its rivalries. The defining moment for the Landsraad and the entire Imperium was the Arrakis affair, the conspiracy of the Emperor Shaddam and Baron Vladimir Harkonnen to destroy House Atreides. Duke Leto Atreides had become too popular and capable for the Emperor's comfort, and the Harkonnens had a generations-old hatred of the Atreides. Together they hatched a plot to eliminate Leto by luring him to take over the fief of Arrakis and then ambushing him. According to the laws, a formal change of fief was taking place, with a judge of the change present. The House Atreides and Harkonnen were technically under the Canley vendetta. However, the secret use of the Emperor's elite Sardaukar troops to bolster the Harkonnen attack violated the spirit of the Great Convention. This was exactly the kind of backhanded extermination of a single house that the Landsraad was meant to prevent. Yet, when House Atreides was brutally wiped out on Arrakis, the Landsraad as a whole did nothing. No unified censor of the Emperor came, no alliance of houses rose to avenge the atrocity. Why? The sad truth is that the other great houses were jealous and relieved. Many nobles envied Duke Leto's righteousness and influence, and with him gone, there only posed very few rivals left. Leto himself has cynically observed that the Landsraad members disliked getting entangled in litigation that could complicate negotiations in other spheres. In other words, they preferred to mind their own business rather than uphold justice if there was profit to be made elsewhere. In the 2021 film adaptation of Dune, we see this portrayed as well. The Landsraad remains complacent about the betrayal of House Atreides, essentially stabbing one of their own in the back when it suits them best. This moment highlights a weakness of the Landsraad system. It could only protect its members if they stood together, and all too often the houses were divided by rivalry and greed. However, the downfall of House Atreides was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a dramatic power shift. The young heir to House Atreides, Paul Muad'Dib, survived the massacre and rose to lead the Fremen of Arrakis in rebellion. As Paul marshaled his forces, he understood the political leverage the Landsraad offered. He considered presenting a formal bill of particulars to the Landsraad High Council, denouncing the Harkonnen and the Emperor for the crimes of treachery. Paul knew that if he could prove Shaddam had used Sardaukar to exterminate a great house, the other nobles would fear they could be next and would likely unite against the Emperor. This threat of a Landsraad uprising hung over Shaddam IV's head in the final act of Dune. In fact, when Paul conquered Arrakis' capital, he deliberately captured the Emperor and brought the battle to a standstill before Shaddam could massacre the remaining Fremen. Paul then effectively forced the Emperor to confront the reality of the Landsraad politics. With the Emperor exposed and weakened, and with the great houses watching, Paul demanded Shaddam abdicate. Facing both Paul's unstoppable Fremen army and the likely defection of the Landsraad, Shaddam had no choice but to step down. By 10,193 AG, Paul Atreides became the new emperor, an unprecedented event where a duke from the Landsraad usurped the imperial throne. With House Atreides taking imperial power, the Landsraad role fundamentally changed. In theory, Paul's ascendancy meant the Landsraad had triumphed, a great house supplanting Carino. But in practice, it marked a decline of the Landsraad influence. Paul was not just another noble playing the old game. He was now a messianic figure commanding fanatical Fremen legions. After seizing the throne, Paul unleashed his Fremen warriors in a bloody jihad across the galaxy, conquering or cowing any house that resisted. The Landsraad delicate balance of power was shattered. No combination of houses could oppose the new emperor's armies backed by control of the spice melange. Many great houses fell or bent the knee during Paul's campaign of expansion. The irony was bitter. The Landsraad had failed to act One of their own houses, Atreides, was attacked, and now that very house, led by Paul, imposed its dominance over them. The Great Convention and its forms meant little in the face of Fremen zealots who cared nothing for old noble etiquette. For a time, fear of Paul and the Fremen replaced the old political order. The Landsraad continued to exist under Paul's reign, but largely in name, its authority and unity were greatly diminished by the new emperor's absolute grip on power. After Paul Atreides' tumultuous reign, the Imperium eventually fell under the rule of his son, Leto II Atreides, who became the legendary God Emperor of Dune. Leto II's rule, spanning 3,500 years, would transform the political landscape beyond recognition. In the early years of Leto II's reign, the Landsraad still technically existed, and great houses still held their titles. But as Leto II consolidated absolute power, he systematically eroded the old feudal system. The God Emperor implemented his own vision, often called the Golden Path, which required complete control over humanity's future. He replaced the old armies with his all-female fish speaker army loyal only to him. He took direct control of melange production and distribution, making the wealth of the Chom and the flow of spice entirely subject to his will. Under such circumstances, the Landsraad was powerless. Leto II even outlawed or neutered other institutions. For instance, he outlawed the Mentat order of human computers to prevent any challenges to his intellect. It's implied that as centuries passed, formal meetings of the Landsraad ceased. The great houses were reduced to ceremonial statute or local governors at best. For several hundred years into Leto II's rule, some semblance of the Landsraad persisted, possibly as a cultural relic or a rubber-stamp council under the God Emperor's watch, but effectively, the old era of the Landsraad was over. Leto II became the single autocratic authority. He had achieved what the Khurana emperors never could, rendering the Landsraad irrelevant. By the time of Leto II's death, some 15,000 years after the founding of Landsraad, the galaxy had been radically reshaped. The event of his assassination was followed by the Scattering, a massive exodus of millions of people to the uncharted space. In the tumultuous aftermath, the Imperium, as it had been known, fell apart, and with it, the classical power structure of Emperor and Landsraad. It's unclear if the Landsraad as an institution survived in any form after the God Emperor's demise. The original sources do not tell or detail a reconstitution of the Landsraad during the later events of the Dune series. What we do know is that the great houses continued to exist, at least in name and lineage, even during the Scattering. Some of the old noble families likely fled or evolved into new social groups. By the time of the Heretics of Dune and Chapter House Dune, thousands of years after Leto II, power in the universe had shifted to other hands. The Bene Gesserit, the Ixian technologists, the Thalaxu merchants, and the violent honored maters from the Scattering. The age of the feudal house ruling an empire-wide Landsraad had given way to something far more fragmented and chaotic. If any assembly of nobles did persist, it was no longer the dominant force it once was. The Landsraad, for all intents and purposes, had faded into history by this point. Its functions taken over by a few alliances and orders born from the long shadows of the Scattering. In closing, the saga of the Landsraad was a sweeping tale of power, alliance, and betrayal that spanned 10,000 years. It began with a beacon of unity, the League of Nobles, rallying humanity against the tyrants of the thinking machines. It evolved into the Landsraad Council, the grand assembly of the great houses that for over 10 millennia upheld balance of power for the Imperium. Through the Landsraad, the noble houses forged a stable, if tense peace, bound by the Great Convention's laws and the mutual understanding that only together could they withstand the forces that might destroy them. This council of aristocrats presided over the Imperium's politics, serving as both a parliament of peers and a shield against imperial overreach. Yet the Landsraad was never an utopian senate. It was rife with the very human flaws of its members. Ambition and avarice often undermined its unity, whether it was the house quietly plotting a rival's downfall or conspiring in the smoky backrooms for a larger stake at power. the Landsraad could be as treacherous as it was noble. Its history is marked with moments of great solidarity and great betrayal. We saw it save humanity from chaos in the early days, but we also saw it falter when faced with the crisis on Arrakis. Ultimately, forces greater than the Landsraad, the rise of the Messianic Emperor, and the onset of the authoritarian Golden Path co-sign it too, these sidelines of history. In the end, the Landsraad legacy lives on as a core part of the Dune universe's rich tapestry. Its very name, meaning the Council of Land, in an ancient tongue, evokes ideas of noble gathering to decide the fate of the worlds. And for most of the Imperium's history, they truly did. The Landsraad gave Frank Herbert's world a realistic political depth, a feudal system in space with all the pageantry and maneuvering of an ancient imperial court. It is hard to imagine the Dune's universe without this council of House Jockeying under the Emperor's gaze. From its inception, in the fires of Balerian Jihad, to its decline of the Eternal God Emperor, the Landsraad shaped the destiny of the empires. Its complete history is a reminder that even in the future of starships and sandworms, politics and power remain as familiar and as dramatic as a gathering of lords in a council hall, deciding the future of the realm. The Landsraad may have faded, but its story endures as a testament to the enduring dance between authority and alliance, a dance that is at the heart of Dune's epic story. I hope you enjoyed this video, as this was some of the most extensive research I have done yet to date on any of my Dune videos. Please remember to like and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time.